Hello, greetings, and welcome. I'm Brian Posey, and in this video, I want to talk a little bit about PowerShell security. Let's talk about code signing and execution policies. Execution policies are something that you can use to control what PowerShell scripts are allowed to run on your system. There are a number of different execution policies that are available, and you can find out what type of execution policy your system is using by typing Get-ExecutionPolicy. Let's go ahead and do that. In this particular case, my system is running unrestricted, and that's extremely insecure. Now, there are a few commonly used execution policies. The default execution policy is called restricted, and when the restricted execution policy is used, no scripts are allowed to run. Only interactive commands can be used, but you can't run a PS1 file. Another commonly used execution policy is called all signed, and when all signed is enabled, only scripts signed by a trusted publisher are allowed to run. And this applies to all of your scripts, regardless of whether they're local or if there's something that you might have downloaded from the internet. Another commonly used execution policy is remote signed. Now, when remote signed is enabled, local scripts can run even if they're unsigned. But if you download a script from the internet, that script has to be signed in order for it to be able to run. Then we have unrestricted, which is what this system is using. And when the unrestricted execution policy is in use, all scripts can run, period. It doesn't matter where the script came from or if the script is signed or not signed, it's going to be allowed to run. Another execution policy is called bypass. And when you use the bypass execution policy, there aren't going to be any restrictions and there aren't going to be any warnings. So typically you would only use the bypass execution policy for automation or for embedded scripts. And then finally, there's an execution policy called undefined, and that essentially just means that no policy is set. So with that said, let's go ahead and talk about code signing. Now, code signing works by taking a digital certificate and using it to sign your PowerShell script. So that way you can verify that the script has been signed by someone trusted, and this is a great way of verifying that the script has not been altered since the time that it was signed. Now, typically, if you're going to be doing code signing, you're going to want to use a certificate that you got from a trusted certificate authority. If you don't want to use a certificate that you acquired from a trusted certificate authority, you can set up an enterprise certificate authority. There's an enterprise CA that's built into Windows, so if you've got an Active Directory environment, you can build that. And then another option is to use a self-signed certificate. So that's what I'm going to do for the purposes of this video, is to use a self-signed certificate. So let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, so here's the command that I'm going to use to generate a self-signed certificate. So the command is new-self-signed-certificate-subject, and for a subject, I'm using cn equals my code signing certificate. You can put anything that you want for the subject. And then I've got -cert store location, and I'm setting that to cert:/localmachine/my. Now, it's worth noting that the syntax that you're going to use here is going to vary depending on whether you're using a standalone machine or a domain-joined machine. The machine that I'm using is standalone. So if you're working from a domain-joined machine, you're going to want to look up the syntax because you'll have to do things just a little bit differently. And then I have -notafter getDate.addYears5. So this particular certificate is going to be valid for 5 years. You can obviously set that to a different period of time. And then -type code signing cert, meaning I'm going to use the certificate for code signing. So I'll go ahead and press enter, and the certificate has been created. Okay, so the next thing that I need to do is to create a variable that points to the certificate that we just created. And I'm going to do that by using this command right here. The command is $cert, that's going to be the name of my variable, equals get-child-item, cert:/localmachine/my. And again, the certificate path is going to vary depending on whether or not you're in a domain environment. And then -code signing cert. Now, in my case, I've only got one code signing certificate, so I can go ahead and press enter. If you've got multiple certificates, you're probably going to have to filter the list of certificate by perhaps using where object or something like that. I'll go ahead and press enter. And let's make sure that we found the certificate. I'll type $cert and press enter. And there's the certificate. So now let's go ahead and sign a script. And for this purpose, I've just got a simple Hello World script. Let me go ahead and open up File Explorer. And you can see that I'm in the C:\scripts folder, and I've got hello world.ps1. And if I open this up, you can see that it's just a really simple script that says right host hello world. That's it. That's the whole thing. So let me go ahead and close this out. And the way that we sign the script is by typing set-AuthenticodeSignature file path, and then we need the path and file name, which was c:\scripts/hello-world.ps1. So then I need to specify which certificate I want to use to sign the script. So I'm going to type --certificate, and then $cert, which is the variable that I mapped to my certificate. I'll press enter. And so you can see that the certificate is valid and it's been applied to hello-world.ps1. So let's take a look at the hello world file and just see what it looks like. And if you look at the beginning, you can still see right host hello world. And then immediately after that, we have a comment line, and then it has sig, and then begin signature block. And then we have all of this text starting right here, and that's the digital signature. And you can see right here at the very end signature block. So my script has been signed. Now, what does that get us? Well, this goes back to the execution policies that I talked about earlier. So let me go ahead and close this out, and I'll switch over to my scripts folder. And before I continue on, it's worth noting that I've got another script, and this one's called hello-world2.ps1. You can see what it looks like. It just says right host hello world, and there's no digital signature associated with this one. So hello-world.ps1 is signed, hello-world2.ps1 is not. And as it stands right now, if I type get-execution-policy, you can see that the execution policy is set to unrestricted. And what that means is that I can run any script regardless of whether it's signed or not. So if I attempt to run hello world, the script runs. And if I run hello world 2, which is not signed, that script runs as well. Now let's go ahead and change the execution policy. So I'm going to type Set-ExecutionPolicy, and I'll change this to all signed. And let's just verify that execution policy. So I'll type Get-executionPolicy. And you can see that it has indeed been changed to all signed. Now let's try running those scripts again. I'll start with hello world. And hello world runs. Now let's try running hello world 2. And remember, hello world 2 is not signed. And you can see that when I try to run hello world 2, I get an error message saying that hello world 2.ps1 cannot be loaded. And then it goes on to say that the file /scripts/hello world 2.ps1 is not digitally signed. And so if I were to set the execution policy back to unrestricted, and then try to run that script again, now it runs because the execution policy determines whether or not the script has to be signed. Now, one last thing that I want to show you before I wrap this up is how you can verify a signature associated with the script just to make sure that it's valid. The way that you would do that is by using a PowerShell commandlet called Get-AuthenticodeSignature. Let me go ahead and clear the screen just to get rid of some of the clutter. And I'll type Get-AuthenticodeSignature, and then -file path, and then the path to my file. And just to make things interesting, let's start with hello-world2.ps1. This is the file that's not signed. And if I press enter, we get an indication that this file is indeed not signed. So let's go ahead and repeat the process, and we'll get rid of the 2 so that we're looking at hello-world.ps1. And this time we can see that the code is signed and that the certificate is valid. And so that's how you verify the digital signature. I'm Brian Posey. Thanks for watching.